Veronica Tennant, CC, was a prima ballerina with the National Ballet of Canada for 25 years, winning hearts and accolades on the national and international ballet stage for her extraordinary versatility and dramatic talents. Since 1989, she has been recognized as a gifted filmmaker, producer, director, speaker, narrator, and writer, with her works garnering several awards, including the International Emmy Award. In 2004, Veronica was awarded the prestigious Governor General's Performing Arts Award for Lifetime Achievement and was announced by the Canada Council as the recipient of the Walter Carson Prize for Excellence in the Performing Arts. As the first dancer to be appointed to the Order of Canada as officer in 1975, Veronica was promoted in 2003 for the breadth of her contribution to the arts in Canada to the rank of Companion, which is the country's highest honor. So we, friends, are in the presence today of one of our country's true cultural icons, and we are so honored to have Veronica with us to discuss her remarkable life and career. Please join me in giving your warmest Speakers Annex welcome to our dear friend Natasha Finlay and the one and only Veronica Tennant.
This is a lifelong dream, Veronica. You were definitely one of the reasons that I was drawn to ballet in the first place, but I'm curious about before professional ambitions entered the picture, what drew you to ballet as an art form?
Well, I was born in London, England, and according to my mom and dad, at the age of 4, I was like a whirling dervish, and it was always in response. And there's one word that will tell you that was the impetus and the trigger and the reason and the inspiration for me to dance, and that was music. Music for me is a lifeline to living and to art and to expression. So apparently, at the age of 4, any response to music, I would just be racing around our living room in London. And at that point, we were at a school that was actually, I don't know how my mom found it in Hampstead, but it was for ambassadors' children, and it was called the Panda School, the Agincourt School. And they said very quickly that perhaps she should send me to a more professional school. So I think at the age of 5 or 6, I went to the Arts and Educational School. And then, and I took ballet, and I took acting, and that was very important because in the end, I think my careers fused together as being a dance actress. That was, in the end, the thrust that went through. And then we came to Canada at the age of 9.
And we are so fortunate to have this wonderful archival gem from your website of one of your first interviews as a dancer in training at Canada's National Ballet School. Shall we share that now with the audience?
Okay, I think I was 16 at that point, yeah.
Shoes belonged to a young girl, 16 years old, Veronica Tennant, who was going to go a long way on her toes. Just to give us an idea of how busy your day has already been before you came to see us, how much activity have these shoes already had today?
I've had an hour-and-a-half class in those.
In ballet?
Yes.
And how many other classes have you had today in other subjects?
I've had my full academic morning class.
Mm-hmm. Which were French and Latin and so forth. Veronica's in her 4th year at the National Ballet School. She has received the highest grades academically, 87% last June in your examinations.
Yes.
And you're in 12th grade.
Yes.
And you will graduate this year, right?
Yes, and I'll be joining the company at the end of this year.
And joining the company as a member of the corps?
Yes.
And then you work your way up. Is that the way it goes,
Yes,
Veronica?
yes.
How much leisure time and free time do you think you can look forward to having in your life for the next few years?
Practically none.
Practically none. Do you ever have moments where you regret this at all?
Yes, I do. I often get very depressed and I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. But they don't last long.
What gets you out of these depressions?
Another class.
Veronica, what are the important qualities for a good ballerina? What must she have to really have a successful career, to be a good dancer?
Well, by the time a dancer has reached the peak of being a ballerina, it's fairly well accepted that she has a technique, that she has got a talent for dancing. But to be a really good dancer, she has to be able to move her audience and to feel music and to feel the roles that she dances. She isn't just a dancer, she's an interpreter of life, I think. Ballet is an art, and it doesn't really explore life. You read, you listen to music, and you have to have a very broad view on life, I think, to be able to be a good dancer. You can't be narrow-minded and selfish. You can't be selfish. You have to be very generous to give to your public.
What roles, when you have reached star status, do you most attract you? Would you like to do?
Well, if I ever reach that status, I'd love to dance Giselle. I think it's a real challenge for a dancer because you combine acting with dancing technique.
That was just a very short clip. So Veronica, I'm curious about, did your understanding of why you danced unfold as your training became professional?
Very much so. I talked about what got you out of those depressions, and I'd say another class, and there was that kind of momentum. I also want to comment on the fact that I did not join the company that next year, and I had suffered in my grade 12 final year a really bad back injury, so bad that I was flat on my back for months. They put me in a plaster cast from under my boobs to my hips, and I was in that for 9 weeks. And I wrote my final grade 12 exams in bed, and all the National Ballet teachers, bless their hearts, they would come to my house, and I was flat, and I wrote my exams in bed, and I was out for a year. When I got back, I did join the company, and it wasn't in the corps de ballet because Celia Franca cast me as Juliet. So she took an enormous risk on me.
It's just astounding, isn't it? She knew.
Well, I have to say, we're going to jump around in this, in our chronology, but I did make a film, Celia Franca Tour de Force, on her at the end of her life. And now with our celebrating the 75th anniversary of the National Ballet of Canada, I realize what a magnificent, triumphant achievement it was and how extraordinary Celia Franca was. And I know you've spoken about her to this audience, but what she began and what we're so proud of the National Ballet now is just monumental. So she was a talent spotter, that's for sure.
She absolutely was. And I said last week, only a Jewish woman could have done it. And I stand by that. So looking back at your years at Canada's National Ballet School, Veronica, how do you think the training shaped, obviously, your technique, but your sense of discipline and your identity, and as you kind of just spoke about, your artistic possibility?
It's true, and we all talk about it. Karen Kane, my friend, Vanessa Harwood, Nadia Potts, who we lost recently, all of us who grew up from those early origins with both Betty Oliphant, who was the founding principal of the National Ballet School, and Celia, they imbued in us this sense of, there was a discipline, but it was a sense of collective achievement. Once you commit to a life in dance, you are committing to a collaborative. And I have this kind of metaphor about how from the first day you take a ballet lesson and you stand in first position and you put your hands on the bar. That bar and those hands are a metaphor for the continuum. It's an extraordinary continuum because every single day of your dancing life, you start with your hands on the bar, but they're not alone. Those hands are gathered and collected by many other hands. And we go through our life together, whether you dance for 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50 years, it always starts in the same way. And from hand to hand, person to person, generation to generation, those standards, those tastes, the style, the realization that we are working together for a greater achievement than for ourselves. That was instilled in us, and not only in our balletic lives, but also in our complete life. I really feel that we were imbued with a through line for life from those early training days.
Oh, that really is a beautiful metaphor. I'd never thought about it like that. And that's, of course, shared with everyone who takes a ballet class, professional, amateur, of any age.
It always starts the same way, you know. And again, that hand is not placed on the bar alone. So the bar is the through line for all our lives.
That is really lovely. And are there aspects of this training culture that, such as you mentioned now, you only fully understood years later as a performer or as a filmmaker, even?
So what do you mean exactly?
So you spoke about the through line and how now you understand that that was collective, but that was something instilled in quite early. But is there anything that you only fully appreciated about the level of training, perhaps, that you received at Canada's National Ballet School that really later on you fully understood, oh, this is why they did things a certain way?
Yes, and the thing is about a life in dance. And interestingly enough, when I did become a filmmaker, my first programs were not strictly concentrated on ballet. They expanded to dance. So my first show for the CBC was Salute to Dancers for Life, which it sort of gathered together wonderful choreographers like Danny Grossman and Yuri Killian and, of course, Roland Petit. And it was the collective of dance that expanded beyond ballet. I've always said, once a dancer, always a dancer. However, dancers, and especially with Joyce Ann Sedemus starting the Dancer Transition Resource Center, proved that dancers, once they have those gifts that they've struggled and strived with in that first part of their life, their dancing life, there's nothing they can't do as they move on, because we have a sense of always wanting to be a student, always wanting to learn, always ready to admit that there's much to learn. And so we can all go into various different fields. And for me, in many ways, when I left the ballet stage, I actually found out that I could spread my wings, and I actually found out that I was an idea person, but I had all of the tools of learning and collaboration that came from those sometimes very stern and strict and difficult years, but through them there was kind of a revelation of what was possible.
I'm so glad you mentioned Joyce Ann Sedemus. Again, we mentioned her last week as another extraordinary Jewish icon who had such a huge impact on our community, well beyond her presence on stage.
Yeah.
And Veronica, okay, so I think you started taking ballet classes in England around age 4, is that?
I started at 4, yeah.
At 4, okay. And then when you joined the National Ballet of Canada a year later than expected, but I believe you were its youngest principal dancer at age 18, is that
Yes, Miss
correct?
Franca, not only did she cast Miss Juliet, but she brought me into the company as a principal dancer, which was pretty unusual. It was a pivotal year for the wonderful ballerina Lois Smith. who about a year or two later suffered a knee injury that really, unfortunately, ended her career. I'm so sorry about that. I wish I could have worked under her and learned from her, because in the end, I actually, at a very tender age, 18, 19, was actually then became, I carried the weight of the National Ballet of Canada on my shoulders, and I didn't have the advantage of learning from, I made my own mistakes. I couldn't learn from somebody else, and she was a beautiful dancer. Yeah.
Oh, that mentorship is remarkable. And we were just saying last week how she was the National Ballet's first homegrown prima ballerina. So I'm sure, as you said, there would be much that you could have learned from Lois. But regardless, do you think there was anything in your training that prepared you for such a fast ascent, regardless of having perhaps a lack of someone to kind of show you the way, and you were just sort of thrown into it, as it were?
Well, I do remember when I was 15 or 16, we were much closer. The ballet school and the ballet company were much closer then. So Miss Franca was constantly watching our classes, and a young, older student created a ballet piece for Sam Moses and myself. He was a wonderful, older than me student, and it was a Romeo and Juliet to the Tchaikovsky score. And we danced it at the Christmas performance. And the next day, it was just a little excerpt. And the next day, Miss Franca came up to me and she said, "Darling," she said, "I didn't think much of the ballet, but I can't wait to get my hands on you." So I think she detected in me that dramatic quality that John Cranko brought to the National Ballet with his production of Romeo and Juliet, that uncovered for the company this depth of dramatic dance, and also moved the company from the Royal Alexandra Theatre to the O'Keeffe Centre, and with a full orchestra. And basically, that ballet, Romeo and Juliet, absolutely catapulted the company, National Ballet of Canada, onto the world stage.
And it's so wonderful that they're bringing it back in the fall.
It's great.
Yeah, so please do come and see it. So speaking of Romeo and Juliet, what was that like to be cast as Juliet? Was that like your first role?
That was my first role.
Oh my gosh.
And I have actually uncovered the wonders of technology that drive us all crazy, but actually, and I've always talked about being someone that likes to live in the present tense. I really have strongly believed that. However, this past year, just realizing that it is the 75th anniversary of the National Ballet, also having this Mac computer and inherited from my mother, the beauty of archiving and just holding on to glimpses of the past in terms of images and videos. And that's how I think I developed the talent to be a filmmaker as well, because of that sense of importance of not losing heritages and personal legacies that are handed on. So I have found all these wonderful images of Earl Kroll, my first Romeo, my wonderful Romeo, and me, on stage, but also backstage. I've got all these photos of him helping me with my makeup and all the early sort of headlines, and I'll never forget, and I have to talk about this, Eric Brune, who had come to present his La Sylphide. He was the god of the dance at that time, 1964. Knocking on my door after my first Juliet, and standing there and giving me some incredible compliments and notes. And he talked about the potion scene, and he made suggestions, and he said, just imagine when you swallow that poison, what the burning quality would be. And he took those wonderful expressive hands of his and put them all down his throat, right down to his chest, to the gut, and made some suggestions, dramatic suggestions for me. And I carried those suggestions. They weren't for me to mimic. They were for me to understand what it would be like to actually burning swallow this poison. And I carried that with every single performance I did of Juliet in the potion scene for the next 25 years.
Because that was your farewell performance choice, was it not, to be
Yes.
Juliet?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Eric Brune, from the time I did my first Juliet right through till when he left us too soon as our artistic director in 1986, the world's model of how man can dance believed in me. And that was incredibly important for me personally, but also for the National Ballet of Canada, because of Eric's word, and he had danced with Celia in London. That's why Rudolph came to us. That's why Baryshnikov came to us. That's why Kranko came and said his ballet. It's very important, again, not only did she give us of herself, but she shared with us these amazing connections from before she came to Canada.
And that was quite unique between the other major ballet companies at the time. Celia was really going above and beyond. She understood.
Yes, yeah. And even like she had cast Alexander Grant and Kenneth Macmillan and John Kranko in a ballet that she did in London.
And now I'm curious, you mentioned your early drama training in England, and I'm sure at Canada's National Ballet School, the acting component was also part of your training. But now I'm wondering about Celia Franca herself, was such a dramatic performer. Did all of this inform, because you are so well known for your spectacular intensity in dramatic roles, was all of this informing how you were preparing these types of performances?
I think so, yes. And I mean, Juliet was only the start, and then of course I did actually dance Giselle 2 or 3 years later, and she very much coached me, and then we, as Michael Krabbe said in our little anniversary video for the National Ballet, there was such a wonderful sense of exploration with Grant Stratty and with the young choreographers that came up through the company, especially in the mid-70s, I would say, 75, 76. Tim Spain, and Ditchburn, James Kudelka, who I actually was very, very proud to help encourage just when he joined the company at the age of 17. And we worked on many ballets together. And then David Allen later, and Konstantin Patsalas. So there was always this creativity, this drive to explore ballet and dance in the wider circumference in the company. So, and then dramatic roles came that way. Like I just actually found a tape of Washington Square last night, and that was pretty special. Yeah.
I really miss seeing that ballet.
Yeah,
It's such a perfect, iconic moment of James Kudelka that he can capture so much in such a small, short form. Now I'm curious about all these contrasts between these highly dramatic classical roles and then these more contemporary roles. Were there any ballets that made you sort of reconsider how you were perceiving ballet as an art form and your role within that?
In the earlier years, I think I was pigeonholed into the classical ballets. And so when the workshops began, and actually I remember being very much in the forefront of finding the Bathurst Street Church when it was still a church and having that turned into a performance space. I was kind of like I remember being very much active in exploring that and making it happen. And then the first choreographic workshops were there. And that's where people were born, like Ann Ditchburn and James. And I remember having a talk with James about how it was important for him to continue, exploring his choreography. So I was really hungry to do more contemporary work. Of course, I should also mention Balanchine, because that's very important that Joyce Ann Sidimas, who started with us as a dancer, but then became one of the handful of Balanchine repetiteurs. So one of my first Balanchine ballets was Serenade, and that's an iconic ballet to dance.
It really is. I wouldn't mind seeing that one again, too.
Yeah.
Veronica, I'm just going to see if I've got my slides aligned here. Oh, I do. This never happens. I must be lucky today. So you had briefly mentioned about Eric Brun and Rudolf Nureyev and Mikhail Baryshnikov. How did these partnerships, and this happened at a very early on point in your career, did it not?
Within the first decade or so, yeah.
Maybe it's even you were too close to the project to even know. How did this shape your artistry at such a foundational moment in your career?
Well, I think I'm not just talking for myself. I think because I talked about us being a collective, let me also talk in the plural in terms of the dancers of the National Ballet. So we learned so much. First, from Celia, but then Eric Brun coming, and then because of Eric, our belief in the company, then Rudolf Nureyev came into our midst. And those years of traveling throughout the US and doing our first performances at the Met, I was honored to be his first Aurora. When I think about it now, how could I have gone out on stage at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York and danced Aurora and the Rose Adagio? It took courage, I think. But also it took his, and all the great artists such as Nureyev, again, belief in us and determination that what we were all there for was to further the art. Yes, it was about ourselves, but the bigger importance was connecting with an audience. What I learned from Nureyev, especially in those performances at the Met where they would roar, they would scream at the end of the performance, was about how dancing on the stage in a ballet that you'd rehearsed for endlessly, for hour upon hour, was not about us. It was about a connectivity, taking that horizontal proscenium edging and turning it around so that it was a direct connection with the audience. And knowing from being in the audience that everyone there thought that Nureyev was dancing for them. There's that sense of like every one of you knowing or feeling that he could see you and you could see him. It just kind of did affect me and did make me realize that it was ours for the giving on stage, but also ours for the taking. And these moments of live electricity could never be repeated, except that they were night after night.
And we hear stories about he would be injured and be taping up his leg, but nothing would stop him from performing.
Exactly, yeah.
And do you have any anecdotes to share with us about working with Baryshnikov?
Well, when he first came, the night before he defected, I had been in the audience at the Oak Center because he was guesting with the Bolshoi, but he was with the Kirov Ballet, and his Don Quixote was breathtaking. I mean, Baryshnikov had this ability to hang in the air. He would jump, and it was everything that Eric used to talk about, hanging in the air. There was a suspension before he would land, and that landing was absolutely silent. And the whole audience was in just shivers of amazement. And then I think it was the next day, and of course it has been well recorded how so many people here in Toronto, John Fraser was one of them, and many of them, squirreled him away to somebody's cottage, Tim Stewart's cottage, I think, and then but it was within 2 weeks that he walked into our studios at St. Lawrence Hall, and we started rehearsing La Sulfide, first for a television production, and then for one performance at Ontario Place, which I think there were about 14,000 to 15,000 people in that audience at the Forum. They started lining up at 7:30, grabbing their seats. In those days, Ontario Place was a blessing because it was free. And people could walk in, and maybe there's some people here who were there. Yeah. And they would come at 7:30, grab their seats. But by the evening and just before the performance, they were up into the hills and completely in the round, which was so exhilarating. And Misha, in the first times I were rehearsing with him, he only spoke French, very Russian, that his second language was French. And he was so shy. Eric came and taught him Bournonville technique, which was new for him. And again, this incredible genius talent that he had from his Russian training, he was able to completely give himself to a completely different ballet technique. The Bournonville is very buoyant and has very sort of structural port de bras, and he nailed it.
Was there any doubt? No. Veronica, I think we have a film clip from The Sleeping Beauty with you and Rudolf Nureyev dancing. Let's take a little look at this.
Okay.
Beautiful.
I have a story about that. So, Princess Aurora in The Sleeping Beauty, it's the textbook of ballet. It's the most exhausting ballet. And one of the key ingredients and necessities for the ballerina is first the Rose Adagio, where your four courtiers, suitors, take you around in a promenade, and then you balance. And that is the great test of your ability, your technique, your bravery. And then in the second act, there's that moment there where he let go of me, and I did manage actually to hold quite a good balance there. And it was only my third, and I have to say this, in a way it's to my regret that film of Sleeping Beauty was made. It was only our third performance. He had come in August. We had 3 weeks to learn the full production. We opened at the National Arts Centre September 2nd. We came 2 days later to Toronto at the O'Keefe Centre, and CBC was filming it. Norman Campbell, the wonderful film director, producer, was filming it. But that was only our third performance. There was so much to learn and to grow in. And I do remember Rudolph coming to my dressing room at the Met, maybe a year or 2 or 3 later, and he was so excited. He said, you hold your balances really well, but you have to make the audience scream, and you have to make them scream with your arms. And he said, and I hadn't learned yet to make the audience scream, because that was a really good balance, but what I should have done was scream. And I did learn. In fact, one quick thing. Opening night of Sleeping Beauty, the first one, I was covered in sweat. We were standing there for the curtain calls, and he turned to me and he wiped the sweat off my forehead, and he said, "Sleeping Beauty, tough nut to crack." Okay. 2 or 3, maybe 4 years later, we're at the Met. We danced like an amazing performance, both he and I. And he turned to me 4 years later, and he said, "You cracked the nut."
It's reassuring to know I'm not the only person who appreciates a good ballet pun. Now, Veronica, up here on the screen, we have this iconic picture of you, Rudolf Nureyev, and Trudeau and Margaret Trudeau. The date is 1972. I think this is just a small example of the impact that ballet was having on our country, but also internationally. Did you feel that when you were traveling, that, wow, Canada's presence in ballet?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. That, first of all, made front page. I don't know if it's the Star or the Globe, I can't remember. I think it might have been the Toronto Star. Front page of the Toronto Star. Also, 1970s, 72, 73, 74, there was called a dance explosion in the world, and there were superstars defecting. Dance was very present in our social consciousness, not only in North America, but around the world. Probably brought about very much by someone like Rudolf Nureyev. But that television production that Norman Campbell produced and directed was seen that year in 73, I think it was, by 3 million people worldwide, and it had the highest ratings of anything that was televised that year, including any sports event, including, any sports event at all. It had the highest ratings. It was another time, and there is maybe a tiny regret these days that there isn't as much of a swell of presence of the arts, of dance, not just ballet, but of dance itself. But it is a smile and a gift to realize that there was a time, and maybe it'll come again. Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Now, Veronica, you were mentioning that, I don't know which point exactly in your career it was, but there was an onstage injury that you suffered that was extremely serious, and you couldn't even walk, let alone dance afterwards.
Yes, so I talked about that year that Rudolph said to me, you cracked the nut. And maybe 75, 76, I went through this period of emotional assessment of how I was dancing. And I had spent the first, much has been made of the fact that I don't have a perfect ballet body. And I think that being in the ascension so soon after Lois Smith left and carrying the weight of the company on my shoulders for our first performances in London and then in New York. And I was often preoccupied with how I was doing and what my peers thought of me, what the artistic director, the ballet masters were thinking of me, and sort of consumed with what I didn't have. And then, I don't know what it was exactly, but I had a period in 75, 76 where I started to just grow into what it is I wanted to create rather than thinking about what are they thinking of me. And I had a really magnificent season at the Met with Rudolph. We did some Giselles that are forever emblazoned in my memory, and Sleeping Beauty and other ballets. And I was at the height. I was at one of my heights. And then Fernando Bujones was a very famous superstar male dancer. We had a series of tours booked as guest artists around the world. We went to Venezuela. We went to different places. And this one was in Fort Worth, Texas, and we arrived. We were going to dance, I don't know if it was Don Quixote we were going to dance or the Nutcracker. And when we arrived, we were fitted with Stetson hats, and there were banners in Fort Worth, Texas, welcoming us and everything. And I left the next day in a wheelchair. On stage, taking off, he had said, he was there, and I was here, and I was supposed to jump and land up in a fish in his arms. And he said, go further away. So I had danced Capelli the night before in Windsor and had flown down, and I pushed off and to leap into his arms from fifth position. And there was this audible snap in my left knee that everybody heard in the audience. And it was the anterior cruciate ligament, which 47 years ago, was game over. Like, I came home in a wheelchair. My doctors, the orthopedic surgeons, were in tears, and it was over. And then the very famous, and we should mention Dr. David McIntosh, because that technique is still done now to this day, was doing a pioneer operation. I might have been one of the first that he did it on, where he repaired the severed anterior cruciate ligament. And we shook hands I was on the table going in for the operation, and I said, "I'm going to dance again." And he said, "Deal." However, that took 14 months for me to recover, because in those days, no physiotherapy, no sports medicine. And I was put into a bent cast with a rubber tube around my neck to hold it up. And I was in that for 9 weeks. I didn't walk for 4 months. And then every single day to get it straight again was incredibly difficult. So the first 4 months, I stopped dreaming about dancing, and I just dreamt that I wanted to walk again. And yet, I did make it back. And so, but it was 14 months later.
Remember what you said about dancers being able to do anything they put their mind to?
Yeah. And that's when I wrote my book, On Stage Police. Well, I had started it a couple of years before. I was writing it on buses, on the bus tours, you know. But then in that period of time, I finished writing my book that was published by McClellan Stewart. Yeah.
I have your autograph in my copy of that book, which I read to my daughter. She just loves it. So, Veronica, I'm curious about what drew you from performing to becoming this superb filmmaker and television producer. Was there a specific moment that you decided to pivot, or was something you'd been ruminating on for some time?
I don't know if I had consciously thought about it, but I really think there is a through line, because I was in so many, I was blessed to be in so many films. I was the title role in 3 of Norman Campbell's, so Romeo and Juliet, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty. And then sort of many other things. And I was blessed also to be in Eric Till's film of Mad Shadows. And I was, other than Mad Shadows, to be honest with you, I was always a little disappointed in the, and I know it was important at that time, but it almost became a recording of the ballet in those days. It just needed to be, maybe because of the size of the productions and the circumstances, but I always felt that impulse and that excitement and that emotion that was here in the dancer, myself and others included, I didn't feel that it came across the screen to the viewer. And so I really did want to explore making the camera dance, but also, again, that axis that I talked about, changing that axis filmically, cinematically, or telegenically, or whatever that would be, just so that we could, as a viewer, kind of have a rod through to connect what the dancer was feeling or dancing. And also, I didn't feel constrained to shoot the whole picture the way ballet demands from the center, but actually to get into angles and very much to get into close-ups so that you could just see an expression. And Eric Till showed me that a bit by how I came out as Isabelle Marie in Mad Shadows. But it was just, more than that, and also having people believe in me at the CBC that I could do that. George Anthony has to be mentioned. He was head of television arts and entertainment and variety, and he just believed in me and gave me carte blanche in a way for my first piece, which was Salute to Dancers for Life. Then Margie Gillis, Wild Hearts and Strange Times. And the third one I did for CBC was Karen Kane Dancing in the Moment. Yeah. Yeah.
And I know our audience really enjoyed seeing a small excerpt from the National Ballet's 75th anniversary video with some of your footage from the extraordinary Celia Franca tour de force, which is so wonderful. And you had just shared with me that we can watch it on your website now.
You can watch the whole of Celia Franca Tour de Force, which is an hour program on her, which was made in the final months of her life. I did smile recently on February the 19th because the first broadcast had been in September of 2006. And then in 2007, Bravo had scheduled a second screening of it because there had been a wonderful response. And she died on that night, and I thought, Miss Franca Celia, your timing was always impeccable. Anyway, it's on my website, veronicatennant.com. There's a pop-up with the anniversary history video, but then if you scroll down, you can see Celia Franca Tour de Force and see an hour program on her. Yeah.
There's such a generosity of spirit in the fact that you created this beautiful film about Celia Franca, but also for Karen Kane, who was one of your, I use the term contemporaries, but she came up in the company after you. Is that?
No.
No, at the same time?
We shared a dressing room for 20 of my 25 years. She came into the company, I joined the company at 64. She's 5 years younger than me. So she joined in 70. So we came up together, and we were such good, close friends all that time. So we are contemporaries.
Was there a specific goal you had in creating that beautiful Emmy Award-winning documentary about Karen? Was there some specific vision you had in mind for sharing her story with a broader audience?
You know what? I didn't call it a documentary. I called it a performance biography. And I very much, and I think that's how it could have gained an International Emmy Award, I very much was looking for breaking down sort of esoteric barriers about it being a ballet documentary. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that going on to CBC on a broader sort of scope and really wanting just your average audience who had maybe heard the name Karen Kane but never seen her dance to explore and to have access to her great talent. So in fact, and this was on purpose, she had talked to me about how Forever Tango had been just so amazing when it was here in Toronto. And so I cold called Louis Bravo, who was the Argentinian director of that show. And we went to New York, and she took tango lessons with this wonderful Jorge, and I can't remember his last name, wonderful male Argentinian tango dancer. And the first piece of dancing that I put in that show was tango, just to sort of expand people's ideas of what a ballet dancer can do, and also to make a show like Margie Gillis' Wild Hearts in Strange Times and a show on CBC television at 8 o'clock on a prime time, Karen Kane Dancing in the Moment, accessible to people and really kind of fun, and the music to be a wide variety. So that was really important to me. Of course, it chronicled her final year, and it chronicled her final performance. We were in Winnipeg for James Kadelka's The Actress, but it also showed the magnificent scope of Karen's talents.
And that was really showcased in The Actress. I remember watching that here in Toronto with all of the different partners and the different styles, and it was such a beautiful celebration of the variety. Well, speaking of Spanish dance, this seems like a good moment to share this wonderful film clip we have of your work. Let's see if I can get this queued up here.
Oh, yeah.
This is such a great one.
Ok, vamos a hacer 3 y 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Cuando empiece la rumba buena, voy pa' rumba, señores. Voy detrás de tu sonrisa, el baile de tu cintura. Baila rubia, baila como negra, que tu silueta enciende mi cabeza. Del timbal, el clave que resuena. Oh, Cuba, cintura que mueve las caderas, sangre caliente corre por mis venas, guitarra blanca que en mis oídos suena, tacones que rugen por mi negra, por la calle voy cantando, de arriba hacia abajo.
Sorry to cut off that fabulous.
You actually cut off my next credit was directed by Veronica. Anyway, I do have to tell you about that because it was 2007, and it was just the first Luminato that was opening in Toronto, that wonderful summer festival. I was at the Giller Prize one night, ran into David Mervish. He talked about Liszt Alfonso, artistic director of Vida y Danza Cuba. And he said, she's actually here. And I said, oh, can I come and meet her? I'd just love to. I'd never been to Cuba before. I met with her. She is an extraordinary person. She reminded me, actually, of Miss Franco, of Celia. She had that same quality. Just Don Spence, my wonderful cinematographer, and I went down 3 weeks later. We went down to Cuba. I'd never been there before. We landed in Havana. I talked my way through with my National Ballet School Spanish because we didn't have like any kind of visa or anything like that, and he did have camera equipment, but somehow I managed to talk us through. I just had to say Liszt Alfonso, and it was like a magic word. She has an academy, and of course it's grown, only for women, for young girls, to teach this wonderful fusion of Afro-Cuban flamenco dance. It's completely original, her style. And we had just arrived. We put our bags down in the hotel, and Don Spence thought we were just going to go and introduce ourselves. So we arrive at this wonderful courtyard in the middle of Havana, old Havana, and this building that you saw. And all surrounding the entire courtyard there were these young girls being dressed by their mom or father and in black and putting the flowers in their hair, and you could see that there were different flowers and different groups and you saw a little clip there of them practicing their paso doble and everything like that. And then all of a sudden this whistle blew, and they all kind of, from this chaos in the courtyard, when it formed these lines, and in they went with their castanets up these winding stairs and burst into different classrooms. It was just, and I said, shoot, and Don said, what? And I said, shoot. So he started shooting it all, and that was the beginning of this extraordinary film that we made, that we then, I think there had already been sort of beginnings of bringing Vida y Danza Cuba, Vida, to the Royal Alex as part of Luminato. But my film, I made a little kind of teaser clip, persuaded Luminato to bring them. And so we took it all the way through to when they performed here in Toronto. It was just an extraordinary experience. And I do have to say that my heart bleeds right now for Cuba. and for their artistry, and just what they are politically going under right now. It's very, very difficult. However, Liszt and I have been in touch. And she says, we're going, you know, and generations of young women have grown up through that academy of theirs. Yeah.
It's always so moving to see how both in your film work and your authored work, you're moving between personal experience but a broader cultural reflection. And I'm wondering if putting into words or putting into a visual medium, does this change how you now perceive dance as an audience member or when you're working to coach in dance?
I'm not sure that it changes it. I just think it expands it. That picture there is from Canada's Walk of Fame. What I loved as I developed as a filmmaker was that I didn't solely work with the camera on dance, so that I actually made the documentaries for Canada Walk of Fame on Cirque du Soleil, on Roberta Bonder, on Mordecai Richler, and as you know, another one of my major films was made with Michael Ondaatje called Shadow Pleasures. So I think it's more an expansion. Dance, I have actually a favorite line from Margaret Lawrence, where it was in her autobiography, that was her memoir that was actually published posthumously, and she called it Dance on the Earth. And I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but it's that we all dance the dance of life. Men and women throughout the ages have danced the life dance, danced hope, danced despair, danced triumph, and danced survival. That is the life dance. And that was Margaret Lawrence's sense of how we all dance a life. And I do believe that. I believe that dance is such an important part of the human condition that whether we know it or not, we are dancing a life.
That's really beautiful. And do you think when you were transitioning into becoming a filmmaker and much more writing as well, were there any points where you thought, oh, I'm taking a big risk with this, but because of your dance training, you thought, I'm just going to take this risk and just go for it and trust that it might pay off?
That's an interesting question, because I don't know that I considered the risks as risks. I just had this desire, curiosity, very important to me, to foster your curiosity. You know, the first 2 years that I left the company, I actually was host, creative consultant, and writer of a Sunday arts entertainment program on CBC television that ran for 3 hours every Sunday afternoon. And it covered the whole spectrum of the arts in Canada. And I had this favorite saying that art is any human endeavor that combines imagination and skill. And we interviewed cowboy poets, we talked to quilt makers, we talked to ballet companies, we talked to musicians, to authors. I mean, I did one of Alice Munro's final interviews. Apparently she never wanted to be interviewed, and then when she heard that it was going to be Veronica Tennant, she took the train and came in, and we had a very good interview. I interviewed Christopher Plummer, and then of course interviewing Christopher Plummer, and at the end of it he says, I'm a fan. And it turned out that his mother had taken him to the ballet in Montreal in his early years. And then consequently, years later, I produced the film that on Christopher Plummer, his memoir, which I really love doing. So I wouldn't say that I thought, oh, this is a risk, shall I take it or not? I just think I did things, and then looking back on them, I go, oh boy, that was a risk.
And Veronica, just to sort of pivot a little bit here, in addition to all of this remarkable work you were doing, you were also really advocating for the arts, well, throughout your career, as you've mentioned, but can you speak a little bit about how you think that advocacy is really important to the sustainability of perhaps dance or more broadly art forms in Canada in particular?
I'll illustrate that a bit. I became a spokesman within the National Ballet Company in my very young years. Somehow I seemed to have the ability to articulate, probably better then than I do now. And so I became a spokesperson a lot. And I remember writing a letter to the Canada Council about the plight of dancers, something like in 1971, on behalf of the dancers of the National Ballet, and talking about how we lived on the poverty line. And anyway, it made its way up, that letter, made its way up to the head of the Canada Council, whoever it was, and kind of had an impact. And so I've always had that desire, and then also publicly, to break down in those early years. I think they might have returned, but those early years about ballet and ballet dancers being esoteric and ivory tower and not, accessible. And that's what was behind those first shows I did for the CBC. I wanted to make them much more approachable, accessible, enjoyable, and not that Swan Lake wasn't, or not that Sleeping Beauty wasn't, but it's just trying to broaden the sort of instant appeal of it. And when I was leaving the company in '89, and of course I had so many inroads to the CBC because my mom worked there too. She was Adrian Clarkson's script assistant. And so I had connections anyway. And Carol Moore-Eade, who was the producer of Sunday Arts Entertainment, that 3-hour show, wanted me to audition. So I auditioned for the role of host, which I did get. But Ivan Fitzan had just come in as the head of CBC Television, and he was heard to say, and somehow it was reported to me, I don't want some ballet dancer talking to us on Sunday afternoons. I want my Ukrainian mother to be able to feel that she could turn it on and enjoy it. So I wrote him a passionate letter about what I really believed was important. And I talked to him about, in my letter, about art being any human endeavor, combining imagination and skill. And that's what I wanted to do with Sunday Arts Entertainment. And so he hired me. And I think that, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's always been a really strong through line for me. And I do fear that our whole lives have changed and our world has changed, and we all know that that person-to-person contact is so inhibited now and limited by what there is, technologically and online and all of that. So I do hope that human connection can I know it'll survive, but I hope it can flourish more than probably it is happening right now.
Absolutely agreed.
Yeah.
It's so important, especially for the next generation.
Yeah, exactly.
Coming up. Veronica, I have a short film clip here about your advocacy work. It's an interview. You might remember this one. I think it's about the Artists' Health Network. There was a gala.
Yeah, it's for the Artists' Health Center.
Beg your pardon, thank you.
At the Toronto Western Hospital, which is flourishing today. And yes, this was with Mary Ito of TVO, I think. And yeah, I'm glad you chose that, yeah.
Let's take a look.
Coming Monday, I can't believe now it's around the corner because the whole dream of it happened about 2 years ago. And it is, the name of the gala is Dreams Come True. And that's because it's a benefit for the Dancer Transition Resource Center. And even more exciting, I think, the launching of a new Artists' Health Center that's going to open at the Toronto Western Hospital. Groundbreaking stuff because it was designed by artists and medical professionals. and it'll be under the banner of the University of Toronto and the whole, UHN. But
Yeah, let's talk for a second about this
Yeah.
health center, because I was very intrigued by it. I understand it's the first of its kind in North America, right? What makes it
Yes.
so different, this health center?
it might even be the first of its kind in the world, in that it was designed over the last 7 years by many committed artists and medical professionals who were investigating that whole area where you take conventional medicine and then alternative medicine, such as acupuncture, such as many alternative therapies, and how do you embrace them in under one umbrella, as it were. And artists who have often are living on the poverty line are also in the forefront of exploration, and obviously have many medical or health needs and issues. And so it was a very forward-thinking idea to start this health center, which will be a very interesting research facility as well as a clinical facility.
Oh, so
Sorry, Mary.
I do want to speak about that. The genesis of that was, again, Joyce-Ann Sedemus, who founded and dreamed of the Dancer Transition Resource Center. This was her baby, and she started 7 years before and just brought in medical professionals, and I mean, it really was, again, a collaboration that was groundbreaking. I do want to talk also about the gala that I'm talking about there. It was called Dreams Come True. David Mervish did make it possible for us to perform at the
I'll have to double check which theater it was.
It's the big one with the Frank Gehry and everything. Princess of Wales. Thank you. Yeah, and I just would like to tell you, because none of those people were paid. So Pinker Zuperman performed with artists of the ballet. Timothy Finlay made his final performance on stage with the piece. Brent Carver came. Stratford brought Graham Abbey, and Tom McCamus did a Shakespearean little monologue. We had so many incredible performers. The National Ballet did something. Evelyn Hart and Rex Harrington performed, and actually Evelyn Hart did The Dying Swan, and Rex Harrington did a piece that was choreographed by Maciej Mrzewski called The Swan Sees His Reflection, which I later made into a film. And it was an extraordinary cultural, artistic event, climaxing in Alan Malka Green, two great benefactors who basically endowed the Artists Health Center with $1 million to start it. Oscar Peterson. It was just extraordinary. I don't know how we did it. Peter Mack and I produced it. It took us a year, and working till 3 o'clock in the morning. And none of those artists were paid. They all gave their time for this Artists Health Center, and it flourishes to this day at the Toronto Western Hospital. Yeah.
So Veronica, just before we open up to the audience for questions, we've got some images here of two of your many honors, including the Order of Canada ×2. I know that's not the official way of saying it. What does it feel like to receive such a high honor from the country?
It's gratifying. Again, I'll speak collectively. I'm so happy that someone from dance could be awarded the highest. And of course, I join Karen Kane and Evelyn Hart in that as being companions of the Order of Canada. I will tell you, in 1975, when I received the Officer of the Order of Canada, I was pretty young then, and I remember being at gatherings after they say you have to wear your pin. And I remember being at some kind of social gathering, and more than one man of a certain age would come up to me and say, "How did you get that?" Not many women and not many artists back then. And of course, times have changed in a wonderful way. But that's how it feels. I'm so happy that, yes, that we can be included in having been thought of as, I think the caption is, we strive to make a better world or a better country. And so I'm happy about that. Can I tell you a quick little anecdote about Adrienne Clarkson, whom you know was a magnificent CBC journalist and on-air personality, and then became our Governor General. And my mom, Doris Tennant, worked for her on that programming as a researcher, and that's where I think I inherited all my archival abilities from my mom. And she was also her script assistant and a producer. And when I was upgraded, Adrienne. So I'm like 16, and she was auditioning for the CBC as being an on-air host. This is the very beginning of her television career. Because of my mom, they brought me in as just for a rehearsal interview. For her, it was an audition. Adrienne was auditioning to be an on-air host. And they brought me in as her interviewee. And at the end of it, I remember the producer, his name was Leo Rampin, and he came up and he said, well, you both were very nervous, but you both did very well. So I've known Adrienne from that time. And so how lovely it was that when she was Governor General, Her Excellency, and I was back at Rideau Hall in 2004 to be upgraded from officer to companion. My mom, Doris, was, of course, there, and Adrienne spoke at quite a bit of length about my mom, which I thought was just lovely.
And just to bring it full circle about the Governor General Performing Arts Award, it's my understanding that there was a mentorship program put into place where Crystal Pite was being mentored by you, and it's just full circle because her piece Flight Pattern is being performed at the National Ballet this week. So if you haven't seen it, please go. I think it runs until this Sunday. So it really is. I mean, Crystal's such a special person.
She's a great talent.
Inside and out. But just before we open it up to questions, I'm just curious about what that mentorship program offered as opportunities, as dialogues between you and Crystal.
Yes, well, let me talk about Peter Herndorf, the late Peter Herndorf, this magnificent, great, I call him an artist, but we all know that he was just this extraordinary arts believer and did so much with CBC, and then on from that, and was for at least 18 or 19 years the Director General of the National Arts Centre, and very much at the founder with Brian Robertson of the Governor General's Performing Arts Awards. That was his baby. I received it, I can't remember quite when, in its
2004, does that sound right?
Yeah.
Something, yeah.
And then a few years later, I think in 2008, they decided, let's take one of the recipients of the Governor General's Performing Arts Award, let's start a mentorship program. And thanks to Peter, he said, you know what, let's start it in dance. So Veronica, we'd like you to be the very first of this program that they now have. And I spent quite a bit of time with Kathy Levy, who was head of dance at the National Arts Centre, and it didn't take long for both of us, probably like simultaneously, to decide upon Crystal, who at that point, we're talking, 17, 18 years ago, was already just such a name in Europe and with the Netherlands Dance Theatre, but also with her company Pivot. And so I went out to Vancouver and we had a lot of wonderful interactions. She didn't need any mentorship from me. I mean, she has such talent and drive and imagination, and So it was just, I would say, I won't take any credit for mentoring. However, I will remember the night that she was awarded it on stage at the National Arts Center, because I had made the little film tribute to her before, that they screened before. And then she did a solo. I don't remember what the name was, but it was just her, just Crystal, in a sort of a black man's suit. And she danced it. It was just like phenomenal to watch her dance. I know there was voiceover text to it as well. And then I was given flowers to come on stage to present them to her at the end of her piece. And I remember walking out onto that stage with flowers to give to her, where the audience was reacting to her solo. And I have to tell you, in all of my wonderful years, I have never experienced something quite like that. The whole audience rose to their feet, and it was like a wave at the baseball game. I mean, it was just like a thunderous wave of appreciation. People were screaming, and it was all I could do to just, give her the flowers and leave and let her stand there on center stage. And of course, Crystal's work these days is expressed with volumes of dancers who all imbue this extraordinary central connectivity that she has. Now that she isn't actually dancing herself, but she dances through every one of the 25 or 30 dancers that create her pieces. So I do say, if you can get to flight pattern, you really should.
Agreed. So if anyone has any questions, now I have to pick favorites. And here's one of my oh no! And I break the clicker. It's my last lecture, so I don't care, but sorry to the next lecturer. Please, what is your question? And I'll repeat it for Veronica. Oh. I think everyone heard the question. We want to know about the jacket, Veronica.
This is Haida. And while I do have met Dorothy Grant over the years, I have a passion for indigenous art. I started collecting Inuit print lithographs in the 70s, early 70s, and carvings, and also Haida art. And while I do have several of Dorothy Grant's, the designer in Vancouver's, art pieces, this is actually by Betty Ann Penner, another Haida artist. It's about 30 years old. And I love it, and I bring it out for my special occasions.
It is. The bootlaces match the jacket. We appreciate these details.
Yes, that's one of those happy accidents I have, because I'm as old as I am, and I really haven't changed in size too much. I've collected boots, clothes, shoes, hats throughout all the years, and so I think these are 20 years old. And things just connect. So yeah.
You wear them so well. Yes, my dear.
Two things. One, you inspire people to see ballet. I'm living proof of that. I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. You were traveling with the National Ballet. You came to London, Ontario. You came to my school. You came to the auditorium. You had a costume of the Sugar Plum Fairy, and I remember being in awe of that and how you could fit into that. And I went home to my mother and I said, we have to go! And the other point is that thank you so much for your mentoring. I see that on April the 29th at the Isabel Bader Theater, you have a program, which I think this is the second or third year you've done it, called The Agony and the Ecstasy, where you're interviewing 2 dancers. And I've seen them in the past, and the support that you, like from a molecular base, show to these young people and introduce them to a new audience is astounding, and it's inexpensive. The basic ticket is $30. And it's just, it's pure heaven to sit there for these people talk. You've inspired them as to how to talk about their dance. I'm just in awe. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, about the Agony and Ecstasy, it's actually been 10 years that we've done it every year for the Patrons Council. We pick 3 dancers from the different ranks in the company, principal, soloist, and corps de ballet. And I always talk to them, write to them beforehand and say, don't be nervous, don't prepare. This is not an interview. This is a conversation. We're dancers, we're on the dressing room floor, we're taking our shoes off. How did you start? Where did your story begin? How did you find dance, or did dance find you? And I have to tell you, over these 10 years, the most recent was, actually we did it at the Isabel Bader Theater with Jera Wolf, the wonderful choreographer who's going to be doing a piece for the company. And I think the next one, I'll do a little plug, April 29th at the Isabel Bader. And their, Hope Muir has selected 3 dancers, again, from the different stages of the company. The bravery, the courage, the ability for dancers to articulate their lives. There have been such honest, because I kind of, in a fun way, sort of say, well, what's your ecstasy moment? But then also, if you feel comfortable, what's your agony moment? And the dancers are so honest. There have been moments that have just been heart-stopping, where each dancer has taken us through their own particular journey, and always what ends up happening is that we understand again how we're a collective. Like we have this collectivity of experience, but then we have this individual through lines that keeps on coming. And every time we do an Agony and Ecstasy, I'm just so inspired by the future of dance and the bravery and the courage of dancers. Yeah.
Hi.
Agony and Ecstasy resonates just because I used to live in New York, and that's what I call living in New York, the agony and the ecstasy. But it's very inspired. I had 2 small questions. One, what was your favorite ballet to dance? Which is probably like choosing your favorite child or something. But the other is, how did you overcome, or how did you learn to change your perspective when you were dealing with not having a dancer's body, or self-criticism or criticism from the outside? How did you channel that into such a positive, constructive thing?
May I repeat the questions, Veronica? No, just because you're quite near the front. Good for you, bad for the rest of them. So the first question was about one of Veronica's favorite roles, and we'll just give her another moment to reflect on that, because I'm sure it's a very difficult decision. And then Veronica had mentioned a lot of self-criticism and negative self-talk that we all deal with, and how she managed to transform that and channel it into something so positive and generosity of spirit with yourself and with others.
Okay, so when I was dancing and I was asked that question, what was my favorite role? It was always the role I was dancing at the moment. However, I did choose Juliet to complete that circle. And it was really the catapult for me at the beginning of my career to understand that even with my imperfect ballet body, I did have something to offer in terms of dramatic identification with a character, or again, pouring into, letting the music inspire me. And that's something I actually did learn in my later years. You see, I don't like my dancing in the early years. I like, and there's so much filmic examples of my dancing in my final years that are freer and more expressive and more giving and not necessarily academically correct, but just free-flowing. And in those final years, those coming back from that from that knee operation and not learning how to walk and dance again. Having a baby, having a child during that year that I was away. I guess my horizons just broadened on life altogether. It was music, and it was just a change of perspective, not being so introverted with what was wrong, but extroverted about what I could give. That's trying to capsulize it. Then in terms of the favorite ballets, I have to mention Onegin, Tatiana in Onegin, in that in 1984-85, Alexander Grant was the artistic director, and he was another person who did believe in my talent, and he was talking with Rita Anderson and Dieter Graffa of Stuttgart Ballet, who were the inheritors of John Cranko. And they decided to bring Onegin to the company, and I was going to dance the opening night with Frank Augustin at the Festival of Festivals. Muriel Sharon was the artistic director. She sadly has passed away. And it was really big, actually. First of all, to do such a ballet that I had seen in New York with the Stuttgart Ballet in the 60s, late 60s, and such an extraordinary role. Tatiana, from the ingenuous young woman in the countryside of Russia, falling in love with the dashing Onegin, and then years later, having had her letter of passion ripped up by him and condescended to, years later, him coming and laying himself at her feet to reconnect. I have to say that when I finally got to dance it, because I couldn't dance it at its opening, and then Eric was our director, and Eric also believed in me, and I finally got to dance it with Raymond Smith. And I chose it as, after the Romeo and Juliet's, there was a gala, and there was a whole sort of look-back retrospective on all my different roles, but actually the closing of that performance was the third act of Onegin. And I actually just found a film clip of a program that Adrian Clarkson made on me in '89, and just in rehearsal with Raymond. And yeah, so I can't say it was my total favorite, but you know, there's Juliet, and there's Giselle, and then there's Tatiana in Onegin. I think those are the three that I would just say, yes. Thank you. They were gifts. Yeah.
Gifts for all of us. Oh, yes?
You mentioned the dance critic Michael Crabb earlier. Yes. What's your take on criticism of ballet, or the critiques of ballet? Have you ever taken any of them to heart? Any that stood out for you, or any that you were disappointed in? And is there a value to that?
May I repeat the question?
Wow, that is an incredible question. I was hurt by many critiques in the early years. I remember going through the doors in the O'Keeffe Center to dance Sugar Plum in the Nutcracker, and seeing on the stage manager's desk a newspaper review for me in a Nutcracker performance I guess I'd done a couple of days before, that said I was nauseating, that my smile was nauseating. And I actually did not always receive glowing reviews, I have to say. And that really did upset me. And there were times over those early years where a critic would take me out to dinner and kind of appear to be my friend. I would talk too much. And then my sort of doubts would come out in the review. So that said, my mom, who I talked about being this incredible researcher, put together reviews from all through the years, and she called it Critics' Corner, and she had this wonderful royal typewriter from war days in London that she wrote everything out on. And there and I have them on my website. There are all kinds of reviews that I received over the years that are quite complimentary, particularly for my Giselle. There's one that says "The Night They Danced Giselle" by Olga Maynard in Dance Magazine. And it talked about when Baryshnikov premiered with Natalia Makarova at the New York State Theater. A night later, Veronica Tennant and Rudolf Nureyev danced Giselle at the Met. And she wrote, these were performances for the history books, the night they danced Giselle. So it's a very good question, because you'll probably hear a lot of actors or people saying they don't read the bad reviews, and I would suggest don't read the bad reviews.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This person. Oh, Danielle, sorry. Yes, I didn't see the lights.
Hi. I would like to know how you enjoy dancing with the British choreographers like La Fille Malgarde, as an example. Did that have an impact on your career?
I love that. Thank you for that question, because of course that was the heritage, that was the legacy from Celia Franca. And actually La Fille Malgarde by Sir Frederick Ashton was a gift, not only to the company, but also to someone like me, because it was a ballet I danced after I returned to the stage after that 14 months off. And it is such a joy. Have you seen La Fille Malgarde? Yeah, with the ribbons. And it is a ballet also that Alexander Grant, our artistic director at the time, took us back to London for the second time for the company at Covent Garden. And so Sir Fred actually took a curtain call with me and with Peter Schofus, who I danced it with at that time. And it's just a delightful ballet with humor and quirkiness and poetry and joy. And it starts off with the ducks in the farm scene in the beginning, and it has the longest kiss between Colas and Lise that in ballet history, because we have to kiss for 16 seconds or something. And it has that wonderful mime. I'm just thinking of, you're bringing back memories where she doesn't know that he's hiding behind a barrel, and she talks about marrying him and then having a baby. And then she says, 1, 2, 3. And it's just a joy. And I will add to that my daughter Jessica saw it when she was 2 or 3 years old, and she said, "Mommy, why do you play a little girl?" So.
And isn't there a horse on stage as well? Is that in La Fille where there's a horse?
Yes, I think so. That's right. Yeah.
The male dancer has a duet, and he pretends he's a horse.
That's right, yeah, and with the reins, the ribbons with the reins. I actually had a lot of trouble with that cat's cradle thing. I was a bit fumbly on that.
And then, if you were the principal, did you dance with is it the May flower, or do they have that as well, like in the whole ballet? Maple.
Oh, a maypole dance scene. Is there one in La Fille? I can't think at the moment.
The other Ashton ballet that I danced right after I came back, in fact, the first ballet I danced on stage after being off for 18 months was The Dream by Sir Frederick Ashton, and Titania with Anthony Dowell was a highlight of my career. That was really a highlight of it. She was such a whimsical, fairy, and the anger with Oberon about the child and everything. It was just delightful choreography. So that was the blessing I had, I think, coming back after being away for 14 months to new works that really did open my eyes and my horizons again. Yeah.
Such a rich career. We might have time for one more question.
Thank you. This might wrap it up quite nicely. I waited 50 years to thank you for your Romeo and Juliet. orchestra. And he called up one day and he said, I don't know what's going up on the stage, because he couldn't see from the orchestra, but he said, the music is so magnificent. You have to come and see this show. And he bought tickets for my mother and me to go down. And it was a religious experience, it really was. So thank you, I was just a kid and
What did he play?
the saxophone, which was really scary for him because he had that introduction at the ball, you know, da-da-da-da, he had to play it cold with
Oh, there's lots of incredible saxophone in Prokofiev's score.
Yeah, so
What was his name?
Lou Lewis.
Lou
Lewis.
Lewis?
A long time ago. He wasn't really a classical musician. They called him in because they thought he would be able to do this because it was a really tricky part. And he just loved the music so much and encouraged us, and we went down to see it. And it goes back to what you were saying about how the music inspired you. You inspired the musicians as well.
Oh, that's so sweet.
That is really beautiful. So, Veronica, just as a small token of our appreciation.